Welcome back to A Novel Escape. We are picking right back up where we left off, and this is episode 2 of Daisy Jones and the Six. And first chapter is already up and reviewed, and then we're gonna start on chapter 2. And I'm just gonna read until the video's long enough, and then I will commentary. I just think it'll be easier if I just keep reading instead of interrupting and getting sidetracked. So here we go. The Six started out as a blues rock band called the Doone Brothers in the mid-60s out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Billy and Graham Doone were raised by a single mother, Marlene Doone, after their father, William Doone Sr., left in 1954. Billy Doone, this is the first person that we're going to hear from in this chapter, is the lead singer of the Six. I was 7 when Dad left, and Graham was 5. One of my first memories was when Dad told us he was moving to Georgia. I asked if I could come with him, and he said no. But he left behind us this old Silvertone guitar, and Graham and I would fight over who got to play it. Playing that thing was about all we did. Nobody taught us. We taught ourselves. And then when I got older, sometimes I'd stay late after school and mess around on the piano in the chorus room. Eventually, when I was about 15 or so, Mom saved up and bought Graham and I an old Strat for Christmas, and Graham wanted that one, so I let him have it. I kept the Silvertone. And then Graham speaks and says he's the lead guitarist of the Six. And he said, once Billy and I each had a guitar, we started to write new songs together. Now, I wanted the Silvertone, but I could tell it meant more to Billy, so I took the Strat. Billy says, everything grew from there. Graham says, Billy got really into songwriting, really into the lyrics. All we talk about was Bob Dylan. Me, I was more of a Roy Orbison guy. I think we both had these stars in our eyes, wanted to be the Beatles. But everybody wanted to be the Beatles. You wanted to be the Beatles, and then you wanted to be the Stones. Billy says, for me, it was Dylan and Lennon. Freewheeling, Bob Dylan, and Hard Day's Night. Those men were my guides. In 1967, with the brothers in their teens, they bought on drummer Warren Rhodes, bassist Pete Lovin, or bassist, I'm not sure. Lovin and rhythm guitarist Chuck Williams. Warren Rhodes is the next person, and he's the drummer, and a drummer needs a band. It's not like being a singer or guitarist. You can't just perform on your own. No girls were saying, oh, Warren, play me the drum beat from Hey Joe. And I wanted in, man. I was listening to The Who, The Kinks, the Yardbirds, stuff like that. I wanted to be Keith Moon and Ringo and Mitch Mitchell. Billy comes back and says, Warren, we liked right from the start. And then Pete was an easy grab. Went to school with us, played bass for this high school band that played our prom. When they broke up, I said, Pete, come on and join us. And he was always really cool about stuff. He just wanted to rock out. Then there was Chuck, and Chuck was a few years older than the rest of us from a few towns over. But Pete knew him, vouched for him. Chuck was real clean cut, square jaw and blonde hair and all of that. But we auditioned him, and turned out he was better than me at rhythm guitar. I wanted to do a front man, and now we had a full 5 band. So I could do that. Graham says, we got a lot better really quickly. I mean, all we were doing was practicing. Warren says, day in and day out, I woke up, grabbed my sticks, and headed over to Billy and Graham's garage. If my thumbs were bleeding when I went to bed, it was a good day. I don't know about it. Sorry. Graham says, I mean, what else were we going to do? None of us had girlfriends except Billy. All the girls wanted to date Billy, and I swear it was like Billy was in love with a new girl every week. He'd always been like that. In elementary school, he'd ask out his 2nd grade teacher. Mom always said she was born girl crazy, or he was born girl crazy. She used to joke it'd be the end of him. Warren says, we played house parties and a bar here and there for maybe about 6 months or so, maybe a little longer, got paid in beer, which when you're underage isn't so bad. Graham says, we weren't always hanging out in the, let's say, classiest of places. There were a few times a fight would break out over something, and you were worried you might get caught in the crossfire. This one time we were playing at a gig at a dive bar, and this guy in the front got a little jacked up on something, and he starts swinging punches at people. I'm minding my own business, playing my riffs, when suddenly he's coming for me. And then it all went lightning fast. Boom! He was on the ground. Billy had taken him out. Billy'd done the same thing when we were little kids. I was headed down to the five and dime, and some kid tried to jump for me a couple of nickels. And Billy ran up to us and then just flattened him. Warren says, "You knew back then not to say any shit about Graham if Billy could hear you. You know Graham wasn't that good when we were starting out. I remember one time Pete and I were saying to Billy, maybe we should replace Graham, and Billy said, say that again, and Graham and I will replace you." Honestly, I thought it was cool. I was thinking, all right, I'm not going to get involved then. Never did bother me much that Billy and Graham thought of the band as theirs. I like thinking of myself as a drummer for hire. I was just trying to have a good time playing in a good band. Graham says, we started to play enough that some people around town knew who we were, and Billy was just starting to get into his lead singer thing. He had a look, you know. We all did. We stopped cutting our hair. I wore jeans everywhere. Got really into big belt buckles. Lauren says, Graham and Pete started wearing these tight t-shirts. I tell them, I can see your nipples, but they thought that was cool. Billy says, we got hired for this wedding. It was a big deal. A wedding meant we were going to be heard by, 100 people. I think I was 19. We had auditioned for this couple with our best song. It was this slower, folkier song I'd written called Nevermore. Just thinking about it makes me cringe. I truly was writing about the Catonsville Nine and things like that. I thought I was Dylan, but we got the gig. And about halfway through our show at this wedding, I noticed the 50-something guy dancing with the 20-something girl, and I thought, does this guy know what a creep he looks like? And then I realized it's my dad. Graham says, our father was there with this young girl about our age. I realized it before Billy, I think. Recognized him from the pictures our mom kept in the shoebox under her bed. Billy says, I couldn't believe it. He'd been gone 10 years by that point, and he was supposed to be in Georgia. That asshole was just standing right in the middle of the dance floor. No idea his sons were up on stage. It'd been so long since he'd seen us, he didn't even recognize us. Not our faces or our voices. Nothing. When we finished playing, I watched him walk off the dance floor. Didn't so much as look at us. I mean, what kind of sociopath does that in front of you? How is that even possible? In my experience, biology kicks in. You meet that kid, and you know it's yours, and you love that kid. It's just how it works. Graham says, Billy asked a few people at the wedding about him. Turns out our father had been living a few towns over, friends with the bride's family or something. And Billy was bowling mad, saying he didn't even recognize us. I always thought that he probably did recognize us and just didn't know what to say. Billy says it messes with you when your own father doesn't care about you enough to say hello. I'm not saying it was a self-pity thing. I wasn't sitting there asking, why doesn't he love me? It was more, oh, okay, this is how dark the world can be. Some fathers don't love their sons. It was a lesson in what not to be. I'll tell you that much. Graham said, seemed like he was a drunk asshole anyway, so good riddance to him. Billy says, after the wedding had ended and everyone was packing up, I had a few too many beers, and I saw this woman working as a cocktail waitress at the hotel bar. Gorgeous girl. Real long brown hair down to her waist and big brown eyes, and I'm a sucker for brown eyes. I remember she was wearing a tiny little blue dress. She was short and white. I was standing there in the hotel lobby on my way to the van, and she was waiting on a customer over at the bar. You could tell just watching her that she wasn't taking shit from anybody. Okay. We have Camellia Doon, wife of Billy Doon. Oh my word, was he good looking. Slim but still muscular, which has always been my type. And he had these thick eyelashes and so much confidence and a really big smile. And when I saw him in the lobby, I remember thinking, why can't I meet a guy like that? Billy said, I walked right up to her in that bar holding, an amp in one hand and a guitar in the other. And I said, Miss, I'd like your number, please. She was standing up at the register. She had one hand on her hips. She laughed at me and kind of looked at me sideways. I don't remember exactly what she said, but it was something like, what if you're not my type? I leaned over the bar and said, my name is Billy Doon. I'm the lead singer of the Doon Brothers, and if you give me your number, I'll write a song about you. That got her. That doesn't get every woman, but it usually gets the good ones. Camilla, I went home and told my mom I met somebody, and she said, nice boy. And I said, I don't know about that. Nice never did much for me. Over the summer and fall of 1969, the Doon brothers started to book more shows in Pittsburgh and the surrounding towns. Graham says, when Camilla started coming out with us, I'll admit I didn't think she'd last much longer than the others. But I should have known she was different. I mean, first time I met her, she came to a gig of ours wearing a Tommy James shirt. She knew good music. Warren says, the rest of us were really starting to get laid, man. And Billy was taking himself off the market. Well, we'd all be with these chicks, and he'd be sitting there smoking a joint, having a beer to keep himself busy. I came out of a girl's room one time, zipping my pants up, and Billy was sitting on the sofa watching Dick Cavett. I said, man, you got to ditch that girlfriend. I mean, we all liked Camilla. She was a foxy, and she'd tell you your business to your face, which I liked. But come on. Billy said, I'd been infatuated before, call it love, but when I met Camilla, it was something different altogether. She just made the world make sense to me. She even made me like myself more. She'd come watch us practice and listen to my new stuff and give me really good notes on it all. And there was a calmness to her that nobody else had. It felt like when I was with her, I knew everything would be fine. It was like I was following the North Star. You know, Camilla was born content, I think. She wasn't born with whatever chip on her shoulder some of us are born with. I used to say I was born broken. She was born whole. That's where the lyrics to Born Broken came from. Camilla says, when Billy met my parents for the first time, I was a little nervous. You only get one chance to make a first impression, especially with them. I picked out his outfit down to his socks, made him wear the one tie he had, and they loved him. Said he was charming, but my mom was also worried about me putting trust in some guy in a band. Billy says, Pete was the only one who seemed to understand why I'd have a girlfriend. Chuck, one time, as we were packing up for a show, said, just tell her you aren't a one woman guy. Girls get that. I was not going to work on Camilla. Warren says, Chuck's real cool. He would cut right to the heart of something. He sort of looked like he'd never had an interesting thought in his life, but he could surprise you. He turned me on to status quo, and I will listen to them still. On December 1st of 1969, the U.S. Selective Service System conducted a lottery to determine the draft order for 1970. Billy and Graham Doon, both born in December, had unusually high numbers. Warren just missed the cutoff. Pete Lovin fell in the middle, but Chuck Williams, born April 24th of 1949, was assigned lottery number 2. Wow. Graham says Chuck got called for the draft. I remember sitting at Chuck's kitchen table, him saying he is going to Vietnam. Billy and I kept thinking of ways he could get out of it. He said he wasn't a coward. Last time I saw him, he played a bar by Duquesne. I said, you'll just come on back to the band when you're done. Warren said Billy played Chuck's parts for a while, but we'd heard Eddie Lovin, Pete's younger brother, had gotten pretty good at the guitar, and we invited him to come audition. Billy said nobody could beat Chuck, but then we kept getting more shows, and I didn't want to keep playing rhythm guitar on stage, so we invited Eddie and figured he could pitch in for a little while. Eddie Lovin says rhythm guitar, the 6. I got along well with everybody, but I could tell Billy and Graham just wanted me to fit into the mold they had set for me, play this, do that. Graham says, a few months in, we heard from one of Chuck's old neighbors. Billy said, Chuck died in Cambodia. He wasn't even there 6 months, I don't think. You do sometimes sit and wonder why it wasn't you, what makes you special that you got to be safe. The world doesn't make much sense. In 1970, the Doom Brothers played a show at the Pint in Baltimore where Rick Marks, lead singer for the Winters, was in attendance. Impressed with their raw sound and taking a liking to Billy, he offered them an opening spot on a few shows on their northeastern tour. The Doom Brothers joined the Winters and quickly became influenced by the Winters sound and intrigued with their keyboardist, Karen Karen. Karen Karen says she ends up being the keyboardist for the Six, and she says, the first time I met the Doom Brothers, Graham asked me, what's your name? I said, Karen. And he said, what's your last name? But I thought he said, what's your name again? Like he didn't hear me. So I said, Karen. And he laughed and said, Karen, Karen. Everybody called me Karen, Karen from them on. My last name is Serco, for the record, but Karen, Karen just stuck. Billy said Karen added this extra layer, a lushness to what the Winters were doing. And I started thinking maybe we needed something like that. Graham said, Billy and I were starting to think maybe we don't need somebody like Karen. Maybe we need Karen. Karen said, I left the Winters because I was sick of everyone in the band trying to sleep with me. I wanted to just be a musician, and I liked Camilla. She'd hang out after the show sometimes when she came up to visit Billy, and I dug that. Billy had her around. Sometimes, or was always on the phone with her. It was a better vibe all around. Camilla said, when they went on tour with the Winters, I'd drive up to any weekend shows they had and hang out backstage. I'd have spent 4 hours in the car and I'd get to the venue. Usually these places were pretty sketchy with gum all over everything and your shoes sticking to the floor. And I'd give my name at the door and they'd show me through to the back, and there I was, part of it all. I'd walk in and Graham and Eddie and everybody would yell, Camilla! And Billy would walk over and just put his arms around me. Once Karen started hanging out too, it just cinched it for me. I felt like this is where I belong. Graham says Karen Karen was a great addition to the band, made everything better, and she was beautiful too. I mean, in addition to being talented, I always thought she looked a little like Ally McGraw. Karen says, when I said that I dug the fact that the boys in the Dune brothers weren't trying to get with me, that doesn't go for Graham Dune. But I knew he liked me for my talent just as much as my looks, so it didn't faze me much. It was sweet, actually. Plus, Graham was a sexy guy, especially in the 70s. I never got the whole Billy is the sex symbol idea. I mean, he had the dark hair, dark eyes, high cheekbones thing, but I like my men a little less pretty. I like it when they look a little dangerous but are actually very gentle. That's Graham. Broad shoulders, hairy chest, dusty brown hair. He was handsome, but he was still a little rough around the edges. I'll admit that Billy knew how to wear a pair of jeans, though. Billy said Karen was just a great musician. That was all there was to it. I always say I don't care if you're a man, woman, white, black, gay, straight, or anything in between. If you play well, you play well. Music is a great equalizer in that way. Karen said, men often think they deserve a sticker for treating women like people. Warren said that was around the time Billy's drinking seemed like it was getting a little over the edge. He'd party like the rest of us, but when we were all went off with the chicks we met, he'd stay up drinking. But he always seemed fine in the morning, and we were all kind of going crazy out there, except for maybe Pete. He'd met this girl, Jenny, in Boston and was always on the phone with her. Graham said anything Billy does, he does hard. He loves hard, he drinks hard, even the way he spends money, like it's burning a hole in his pocket. It was a part of the reason why, with Camilla, I was telling him to take it slow. Billy says Camilla came out with us sometimes, but a lot of the times she waited at home. She was still living with her parents, and I would call her every night from the road. Camilla said when he didn't have a dime to make a call, he'd call collect, and when I'd answer, he'd say, Billy June loves Camilla Martinez, and then hang up before the charge kicked in. And my mom always rolled her eyes, but I thought it was sweet. Karen said a few weeks after I joined the band, I said, we need a new name. The Doon Brothers didn't make sense anymore. And Eddie said, I'd been saying we need a name. Billy said, we had a following with that name. I didn't want to change it. Warren said, we couldn't decide what to call ourselves. I think somebody suggested the Dipsticks. I wanted to go by Shaggin'. Eddie said, Pete said, you're not going to get 6 people to agree on this. And I said, what about the 6? Karen said, I got a call from a booker in Philly where I'm from, and he said that the Winners had pulled out of a festival there. Asked if we wanted to play. I said, right on. But we aren't called the Doon Brothers anymore. He said, well, what do I put on the flyer? I said, not sure yet, but I'll get 6 of us there. And I liked how it sounded. The 6. Warren said, part of the brilliance of the name was how close it was to the sex. But I don't think any of us ever talked about that. It was so obvious there was no need to put a finger on it. Karen said I was not thinking about it sounding like anything. Billy said the sex. No, that wasn't part of it. Graham said it sounded like sex. That was a big part of it. Billy said we played that show in Philly as the 6, and then we got an offer to do another show in town, another in Harrisburg, another in Allentown. We got asked to play New Year's Eve at the Spar in Hartford. We weren't making much money, but I'd spend my last dollar taking Camilla out whenever I was home. We'd go to this pizza joint a few blocks from her parents' place, or I'd borrow money from Graham or Warren to take her out somewhere nice. She's always told me to cut it out, she'd say. I wanted to be with a rich guy. I wouldn't have given my number to the singer of a wedding band. Camilla said Billy had charisma, and I fell for that. I always did. The smoldering, the brooding. A lot of my girlfriends were looking for guys that could afford a nice ring, but I wanted somebody fascinating. Graham said, around 71, we booked a few shows in New York. Eddie said, New York it was how you knew you were somebody. Graham said, one night we're playing a bar over in the Bowery, and out on the street, smoking a cigarette is a guy named Rod Reyes. Rod Reyes is the manager of the 6, and he says Billy June was a rock star. You could just see it. He was very cocksure, knew how to play 2 in the crowd, and there was an emotion that he brought to his stuff. There's just a quality that some people have. If you took 9 guys plus Mick Jagger and put them in a lineup, somebody who had never heard of the Rolling Stones before would still point to Jagger and say, that's the rock star. Billy had that, and the band had a good sound. Billy said when Rod came up to us after that show at the Wreckage, that was the watershed moment. When I started working with the band, I had some ideas, some of which were real well received and others not so much. Graham said Rod told me I needed to cut out half of my solos, said they were interesting for people that loved technical guitar work, but boring for everyone else. I said, why would I play to people who don't care about good guitar? He said, if you want to be huge, you got to be for everybody. Billy said, Rod told me to stop writing about stuff I didn't know about. He said, don't reinvent the wheel. Write about your girl. Hands down, best career advice I ever had. Karen said, Rod told me to wear low-cut shirts, and I said, dream on. And that was about the end of that. Eddie said, Rod started getting us gigs all over the East Coast, Florida to Canada. Warren said, let me tell you, the sweet spot for being in rock and roll People think it's when you're up on top, but no, that's when you've got the pressure and the expectations. What's good is when everybody thinks you're headed somewhere fast, when you're all potential. Potential is pure fucking joy. Graham said the longer we were out on the road, the wilder we all got. And Billy wasn't exactly, well, Billy liked attention, especially from women. But at least at that point, that's all it was, just attention. Billy said, it was a lot to balance. Loving somebody back home, being out on the road, girls were coming backstage, and I was the only one they wanted to meet. I was. I didn't know what a relationship was supposed to look like. Camilla said, we started to get into fights, Billy and I will admit I wanted something impractical back then. I wanted to date a rock star, but I wanted him available at all times. I'd get mad when he couldn't do exactly what I wanted. I was young. So was he. Sometimes it would get so bad that we'd stop talking for a few days, and then one of us would call the other and apologize, and things would go back the way they were. I loved him, and I knew he loved me. It wasn't easy, but as my mother used to remind me, you've never been interested in easy. Graham said this one night. Billy and I were back home and getting in the van to head out to Tennessee or Kentucky or somewhere, and Camilla came to see us off, and when Rod pulled up in the van, Billy was saying goodbye. He moved the hair out of Camilla's face and put his lips on her forehead. I remember that he didn't even really kiss her. He just held his lips there, and I thought, I've never cared about anyone like that. Billy said, I wrote Sonora for Camilla, and let me tell you, people liked that song a lot. Pretty soon, at our best shows, people were getting up out of their seats, starting to dance, singing along. Camilla said, I didn't have the heart to tell him that I was technically a senorita. I mean, choose your battles. Besides, once I listened to it, let me carry you on my back. The road looks long and the night looks black, but the two of us are bold explorers. Me and my gold Sonora. I loved it. I loved that song. Billy said, we cut a demo of Sonora and When the Sun Shines on You. Rod said, my real contacts were all out in LA by then. And I said to the band, I think it was maybe 72. I said, we got to go out west. Eddie said, California, was where the cool shit was happening. You know what I mean? Billy said, I just thought there's something inside me that needs to do this. Warren said, I was ready to go. I said, let's get the van. Billy said, I went to Camilla's parents' house and I set her down on the edge of her bed. I said, do you want to come with us? She said, what would I do? I said, I don't know. She said, you want me to just follow you around? I said, I guess. She took a moment, then she said, no, thank you. I asked her if we could stay together, and she said, are you coming back? And I told her I didn't know. And she said, then no. And she dumped me. Camilla said, I got mad that he was leaving, and I blew up at him. I didn't know how else to handle it. Karen said, Camilla called me before we left on tour, told me she'd broken up with Billy. I said, I thought you loved him. And she said, he didn't even try to fight me on it. I said to her, if you love him, you should tell him. And she said, he's the one leaving. It's on him to fix this. Camilla says, love and pride don't mix. Billy said, what could I do? She didn't want to come with me, and I couldn't stay. Graham said, we packed up and said goodbye to Mom. She'd married the mailman by then. I mean, I know his name was Dave, but until the day he died, I called him the mailman. Because that's what he was. He delivered the mail at our house, and he was the mailman. Anyway, we left Mom with the mailman, got in the van. Karen said, we gigged everywhere along the way from Pennsylvania to California. Billy said Camilla had made her choice, and there was a big part of me that felt like, all right, I'll be single then. See if she likes that. Graham said, Billy straight up lost his mind on that trip. Rod said, it wasn't the woman I was worried about with Billy, although there were a lot of women. But Billy would get so messed up after shows that I'd have to wake him up the next afternoon by slapping him across the face. He was that far gone. Camilla said, I was sick to my stomach without him. I was kicking myself every day, waking up in tears. My mom kept telling me to track him down, to take it back. But it felt like it was too late. He'd gone on without me to make his dreams come true, as he should have. Warren says, when he got to LA, Rod hooked us up with a few rooms at the Hyatt House. Greg McGinnis, who we met in the first chapter, is back. He's the former concierge at the Continental Hyatt House. Oh man, I love to tell you that I remember the six coming in and staying with us, but I don't. There was so much going on, so many bands back then. It was hard to keep track. I remember meeting Billy Doon and Warren Rhodes later, but back then, no. Warren said, Rod called in his favors and we started playing bigger gigs. Eddie said, LA was a trip. Everywhere you looked, you were surrounded by people who loved playing music, who liked to party. I thought, why the hell didn't we come here sooner? The girls were gorgeous and the drugs were cheap. Billy said we played a few shows around Hollywood at the Whiskey, the Roxy, PJ's. I'd just written a new song called Further From You. It was all about how much I missed Camilla, how far I felt from her. When we hit the strip, that felt like we were really coming into our own. All of us started to dress better, Graham said. You really had to step up your game in LA. I started wearing my shirts unbuttoned halfway down my chest. I thought I was sexy as hell. Billy said that was about when I got really into what it is that people call it now, a Canadian tuxedo. I was wearing a denim shirt with my jeans pretty much every day. Karen said, I felt like I couldn't focus on playing if I dressed in mini skirts and boots and all that. I mean, I liked the look. I wore high waisted jeans and turtlenecks most of the time. Graham said Karen was so fucking sexy in those turtlenecks. Rod said once they were starting to get some good attention, I set up a show for them at the Troubadour. Ooh. Graham said Farther From You was a great song, and you could tell Billy felt it. Billy couldn't fake anything when he was in pain or when he was joyful. You could feel it. That show at the Troubadour that night, as we were playing, I looked over at Karen and she was in it, you know? And then I looked at Billy and he's singing his heart out, and I thought, this is our best show yet. Rod said, I saw Teddy Price standing in the back listening. I hadn't met him before, but I knew he was a producer with Runner Records. We had a few friends in common. After that show, he came up and found me, said, my assistant heard you guys at PJ's. I told him I would come listen. Billy said, we got off stage and Rod comes up to me with this real tall, fat boy in a suit and he says, Billy, I want you to meet Teddy Price. First thing Teddy says is, and you have to remember he had this real thick upper crust British accent. You've got a hell of a talent for writing about that girl. Sorry, I can't really talk British. Karen said, watching Billy, it felt a little bit like watching a dog find a master. He wanted to please him, wanted the record deal. You could feel it dripping off of him. Warren said, Teddy Price was ugly as sin, a face only a mother could love. I'm just messing around. He was ugly, though. I liked that he didn't seem to care. Karen says, that's the glory of being a man. An ugly face isn't the end of you. And Billy said, I shook Teddy's hand and he asked me if I had any more songs like the ones he'd heard. I said, yes, sir. He said, where do you see this band in 5 years, 10 years? And I said, well, we'll be the biggest band in the world. Warren said, I signed my first pair of tits that night. This girl comes up to me and unbuttons her shirt and says, sign me. So I signed her. And let me tell you, that's a memory you have for a lifetime. The following week, Teddy visited the band at a rehearsal space in the San Fernando Valley and listened to the 7 songs that had been prepared. Shortly after, they were invited to the Runner Records offices, introduced to CEO Rich Palantino, and offered a recording and publishing deal. Teddy Price personally would be producing their album. Graham said, we signed the deal around 4 in the afternoon, and I remember walking out into Sunset Boulevard, the 6 of us, the sun hitting us right in the eyes, and just feeling like Los Angeles had opened its arms and said, come on in, baby. I saw a t-shirt a few years ago that said, I got my shades on because my future's so bright. And I thought, the little shit that was wearing it doesn't know what he's talking about. He never stood on Sunset Boulevard, sun blinding his eyes with his 5 best friends and a record contract in his back pocket. Billy said that night everybody was out partying over at the Rainbow, and I walked down the street to a payphone. Imagine archiving your wildest dream and feeling empty inside. It didn't mean anything unless I could share it with Camilla. So I called her. My heart was beating so fast as the phone rang, and I put my fingers to my pulses. And it was throbbing. But when Camilla answered it, it was like laying down in bed after a long day. I felt so much better just hearing her voice. I said, I miss you, and I don't think I can live without you. She said, I miss you too. I said, what are we doing this for? We're supposed to be together. And she said, yeah, I know. We were both quiet on the line, and I said, if I have a record contract, would you marry me? She said, what? Camilla said, I was just so excited for him if it was true. He'd worked so hard for it. Billy said, I said it again. If I have a record contract, would you marry me? She said, you got a record contract? That's when I knew right then that Camilla was my soulmate. She cared more about the record contract than anything else I said. You didn't answer my question, she said. Did you get a record contract? Yes or no? I said, will you marry me? Yes or no? She didn't say anything for a while, and then she said yes. And then I said yes. She started screaming, so excited. I said, come on out here, honey. Let's get hitched. And that is the end of chapter 2. It Girl, 1972 to 1974. Determined to make a name for myself outside of the Sunset Strip, Daisy Jones started writing her own songs, armed only with a pen and paper and no musical training whatsoever. Daisy created a songbook that soon grew to include rough sketches of over 100 songs. One night during the summer of 72, Daisy attended a Mia Vida show at the Ash Grove. And she was dating Mi Vida from frontman with Jane Blades at the time. Toward the end of the set, Jim invited Daisy onto the stage to do a cover of Son of a Preacher Man with the band. Simone says, Daisy had grown her hair out really long by then, gotten rid of her bangs. She always wore hoop earrings, and she never wore shoes. She was just very cool. That night at the Ash Grove, she and I were sitting in the back, and Jim tried to get her to go up there, and she kept saying no. But he kept at it most of the night, and eventually Daisy got on stage. Daisy said it was a surreal feeling. All of these people looking at me, expecting something to happen. Simone said when she started singing with Jim, she was kind of timid about it, which surprised me, but I couldn't feel her getting more and more into it as the song went on. And then somewhere around the second chorus, she just let it rip. She was smiling, she was happy up there, and people couldn't take their eyes off of her. By the time they got toward the end, Jim had stopped singing and just let her go. She brought that house down. Jim Blades, lead singer of Mi Vida. And Daisy had this incredible voice. It was gritty, but never scratchy. You'd have thought she had rocks in her throat that the sound had to travel over. It made everything she sang complex and interesting and kind of unpredictable. I've never had much of a voice myself. You don't have to have a great voice to be a singer if your songs are good enough. But Daisy had the whole thing going, man. She was always singing from deep in her belly. It takes people years to learn something like that, and Daisy just did it naturally. Did it singing in the car next to you or folding the laundry. I was always trying to hear her sing with me, and she always said no until the night at the Ash Grove. I think she finally agreed to sing in public because of how bad she wanted to be a songwriter. I told her, the biggest thing your songs have going for them is that you might sing them. Her biggest asset was that people couldn't take their eyes off of her. And I told her to use that. Daisy said, I felt like Jim was basically saying that nobody cared what I was singing about as long as they could get a look at me. Jim always made me mad. Jim said, if memory serves, Daisy threw her lipstick at me, but when she calmed down, she asked me where she should try to play some gigs. Daisy said, I wanted to get my songs heard, so I started singing a bit around LA. I'd sing a few of my songs, do some stuff with Simone, Greg McGinnis, the concierge. Daisy was dating everybody. Like, oh man, when that fight broke out between Tick Yoon and Larry Hatman outside Licorice Pizza and Tick busted Larry's eyebrow open, that was crazy stuff. I was there. And I'd been buying my Dark Side of the Moon LP. So, when was that? Late 72, maybe early 73. I looked outside and Tick's got Larry in a headlock. People said they were fighting over Daisy. Plus, I'd heard Dick Poller and Frankie Bates had both tried to get her to record a demo and she turned them down. Daisy said, suddenly there was so many people trying to convince me to do a demo. All these guys wanted to be my manager. But I knew what that meant in LA is full of men just waiting for some naive girl to believe their bullshit. Hank Allen was the last smarmy. He was the one that I could tolerate the most. But by that point, I had moved out of my parents' house and into the Chateau Marmont. I'd rented a cottage in the back, and Hank was at my door all the time, leaving messages. He was the only one not just talking about me, but also about my songs. I said, all right, if you want me to manage me, you can manage me. Simone said, when I met Daisy, I was the older, wiser, cooler one, but by the early 70s, Daisy was it. I remember I was in her room at the Marmont one time and I'm looking at her closet and I see all these Halston wraps and jumpsuits. I said, when did you get all the Halstons? She said, oh, they sent them over. I said, who did? She said, somebody at Halston. This was a girl that hadn't even released a single piece of work, no album, no single, but she was in the magazines and photos with rock stars. Everybody loved her. I took some of those Halstons though. Daisy said, I went over to Larrabee Sound to record the demo Hank wanted me to record. I think it was a Jackson Browne song. Hank wanted me to sing the song really sweet, and I wasn't feeling it. I sang it the way I wanted to, a little bit rough, a little bit breathy. Hank said, can we please just do one take where you sing it smooth? Maybe a key higher? I grabbed my purse and said, nope, and I left. Simone said she got signed to Runner Records right after that. Daisy said, I didn't care about anything but songwriting. The singing was okay, but I didn't want to be some puppet up there singing other people's words. I wanted to do my own thing, and I wanted to sing my own stuff. Simone said, Daisy doesn't value anything that comes easy to her. Money, looks, even her voice. She wanted people to listen to her. Daisy said, I signed the deal with Runner Records, but I didn't read the contract. I didn't want to read contracts and pay attention to who I was supposed to pay what money to and what I was expected of me. I wanted to write songs again. Simone, they scheduled her for a kickoff meeting and I went over to her place and we put together the perfect outfit, went through her songbook to get it just right, and when she left to go over there that morning, she was walking on air. But however many hours later, she showed up at my place and I could tell something was wrong. I said, what's going on? She just grabbed the bottle of champagne we'd bought to celebrate, popped it open, and walked into my bedroom. I followed her in there, and she was running herself a bath. She stripped off her clothes and got in the tub and took a swig right from the bottle. I said, talk to me. What happened? She said, they don't care about me, I guess. At the meeting, they handed her a list of songs they expected her to do, and it was stuff from that catalog. Leaving on a jet plane kind of stuff. I said, what about your own songs? She said, they don't like my songs. Daisy said they read through my entire book and couldn't find one song in there. Not one song. They thought I should record. I said, what about this one? And this one? And this one? I was at the conference table with Rich Palantino and I was flipping through the book, panicked. I was thinking they must have read them. must not have read them. They just kept saying the songs weren't ready yet, and that I wasn't ready to be a songwriter. Simone, she got drunk in the tub, and all I could do was just make sure that when she passed out, I pulled her out and put her in a bed, which is what I did. Daisy said I got up the next morning and went back to my own place. Tried to put it out of my mind by laying by the pool. When that didn't work, I smoked a few cigarettes, did a few lines in my cottage. Hank came over and tried to calm me down. I said, "Get out of this." And he kept telling me, "I don't want to get out of it." I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "No, you don't." I got so mad I ran out of my own place faster than Hank could catch me. I drove right over to Runner Records. I was in the parking lot before I realized I was still in a bikini top and jeans. I went right into Rich Palantino's office and ripped up the contract. Rich just laughed and said, Hank called and said, "You might do that." Honey, it's not how contracts work. Simone said, Daisy was Carole King. She was Laura Nyro. Hell, she could have been Johnny Mitchell. And they wanted her to be Olivia Newton-John. Daisy said, I went back to the Marmont. I had been crying. I had mascara running down my face. Hank was waiting for me, sitting on my stoop. He said, why don't you sleep it off? I said, I can't sleep. I've had too much Coke and too many Dexies. He said he had something for me, and I thought he was going to hand me a Quaalude. Quaalude. Like that was going to do anything, but he gave me a Seconal. I was out like a light, and I woke up feeling so much better. No hangover, nothing. For the first time in my life, I was sleeping like a baby. From then on, it was Dexies to get through the day, Reds to get through the night, champagne to wash it all down. The good life, right? Except for the good life never made for a good life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We are on to the next chapter. Debut.